Hello everyone, hope you're doing good. At the time of recording this video, it's been about a month since the Nightreign DLC came out, and while I wanted to do more of an Undertaker review and tell you if you should buy the game when it came out, I had a surgery that happened and then I got distracted once I recovered. Made an unbeatable review, so you should go check that out after this. But yeah, because of that, it's been some time, so I'm gonna do more of a critique now than an actual review. And just know that this falls under definition 1 of a critique, and that being I'm not just gonna completely dog on the DLC the whole time. It's an evaluation and judgment, and therefore I'm going to be pointing out stuff that I think the DLC did great and then not so great. So there's plenty of that in this video, but that's enough of me yapping. Anyways, here are the timestamps, and yeah, please enjoy the video. Alright, starting off with the Nightfarers. These were probably my favorite part of the entire DLC, by far, because they bring so much value to the game that the, core gameplay loop really doesn't, because after a while you get it, and it's always nice to have something that completely changes up the way you play, and I think both Nightfarers did a very good job with that. But I think I'm going to start with the one I played the most, which was the Undertaker. But yeah, starting off with the Undertaker, she is a strength faith character who is supposedly an abbess. She's got the whole nun design, but if you ask me, underneath all of that, she's an eldritch horror based on her ultimate art and some rather questionable remembrance scenes. But yeah, like I said, her stats are geared towards strength and faith, with her specializing in hammers, so that fills that little niche there that we didn't really have before. But if you ask me, none of that really matters, because it's her abilities that make her so great, in my opinion. And so I'll just give a little quick overview. Trance is her primary ability that refreshes her stamina and gives the Undertaker both increased attack and poise for the duration of the ability, which is already insane by itself. And this ability does a lot for the character in terms of build variety, so I'm just going to give some examples of the builds that I found to just hammer in the fact that she is able to do pretty much everything. And so the first build that I found when I was playing with her was a cast melee build, which, is pretty reminiscent of Revenant, but I think she can do it a little bit better. I know she doesn't have the best mind stat, but with a few relics or starlight shards, I feel like anyone can pull this off. And I like to play this build like a cycle where I'll have a melee weapon in one hand and then a cast or seal in another hand, and basically I'll just do as much damage as possible before using trance to get my stamina back and keep on attacking, like normal. And then once the cooldown is like on cooldown, then I'll back up and start using cast until trance is back up. And this way you're always doing damage, but you have all of that stamina while you're attacking, so you're putting out damage constantly. You're doing attacking with melee and then you're backing up and doing cast damage. And so I don't know, it's just a unique way to play. It's more of a niche, honestly. Again, you need more like a relic, and if you do like Dark Knight of the West to try to get more FP from rises, you can't really do it on the new map because there's only like one rise or something. But yeah, it's just one of the playstyles. And then the next type of build that Trance allows for, I'm just gonna kind of lump into one, which are jump builds and charge builds. Historically in Souls games, these type of attacks take a lot of stamina, and that's why a character like Raider is so good for these. But with Undertaker, again, you can just refresh that stamina, and she has a high strength stat, so therefore you can just do a lot of jump attacks and charge attacks, and then once you run out of stamina, then boom, you just pop trance again and you get more stamina to do those attacks. It's pretty self-explanatory, but you can do a lot of damage considering that you get that attack boost and you get the poise, so you can tank through attacks that you normally wouldn't be able to and kind of play like a mini Raider. And I just think that's pretty cool, because you don't always get the weapons that you want, and so therefore having that flexibility to kind of just change your build depending on the situation is very useful. And then the last kind of build class that I found is kind of like a subclass of the charge builds, because you can use it with the charge builds, but that's successive attacks, and some of her relics are geared to that as well. But basically, because of her unique moveset with the hammer, you can pop off successive attacks, and so I like to do charge successive attacks and then pop her trance again, because that's just really the key thing here for build variety, is getting that stamina back so you can pull off builds like that. And so I will then get the successive attack damage boost and then pop the trance and get another damage boost and more poise, so that way I can just keep on attacking. And it's really good, especially if you get talismans geared towards these builds like Millicent's Prosthesis for successive attacks, or Ring Insignia, or then a charge or claw talisman for the jump and charge builds. It just makes things a whole lot better, and again, you have that flexibility which a lot of characters just don't have. They have it, but just not to the same degree. That's what I'm really trying to say. But that's just really her first ability. Her ultimate art, the Loathsome Hex, kind of just pulls a sword out of her like throat or whatever. I don't know. That's why I said she's like an Eldritch Horror, just like really creepy. But you know, this ultimate sends her like flying at Mach 7 before slamming into the enemy, which deals a whole lot of stance damage and some decent damage, providing a good amount of iframe. So you can use this in a pickle or whatever. It doesn't really have that good res potential, so I wouldn't try to use it for that. But yeah, her gameplay is really centered around this, and especially with her relics giving you attack boosts and stuff like that whenever you use the ult, and her passive allows for you to get your ult whenever another teammate uses her ult. So basically the game is just like screaming at you, hey, you want to use this as much as possible, and I really don't mind, because it's really funny, especially when you have multiple Undertakers. If you've ever played like that or seen a clip, then you know the absolute carnage that can unfold if you just unleash that ult on a poor helpless enemy. It's so bad. And then on top of that ultimate art, you also can have another ultimate art, which is really cool, because if you use your trance ability, it's called bloodletting in the description of the trance ability, but if you do that, then you can get a secondary ult, which basically just gives you Hikari levels of invincibility for like 15 seconds. It's absolutely busted, but it gives another layer of choice whenever you want to use your ultimate. And basically it's just Wilder 6th Sense, but infinite for 15 seconds. Anytime you get hit, you just back up a little bit and you get back to whatever you were doing. So you can use this to be aggressive or survive an attack or get up a teammate that's, you know, at 3 ticks again, or whatever you need to do. If you're playing with another Undertaker, then you probably need to coordinate and think about which version of the ult you want to use depending on the situation. Maybe you want to res that teammate that's dead again and get them up, but if you use 2 ults at the same time, then you now have 4 of those from hexes, and that way you have a higher chance of breaking enemy stance. And then maybe while they're getting their riposte, you can res a teammate, or maybe you just want to play it safe and use the alternate ult. It doesn't really matter, because you have that choice, and whatever you're comfortable with, you can do, which I really do appreciate for this character. I typically find myself using the alternate ult more now, as, you know, it was really funny at first to use the Loathsome Hex, but it's more of a strategic thing for me to use the secondary ult, because normally I'm not playing with another Undertaker, and so I'll just get the Loathsome Hex whenever one of my teammates uses ult, and it's more consistent value to use the secondary ult, but that's just me ranting. The only thing that I think holds this character back in quotations is the fact that she's just a jack of all trades, but not really a master of anything. She can do almost everything. Like I said, she has so much build potential, but in everything she does, there's pretty much always someone who does it better. Raider can tank and output damage better. Wilder and Iron Knight also have similar player choice, and they also output damage better. And then Recluse and Revenant also have better casting abilities in relation to their FP pools. And her lack of ability to excel in any area can kind of make her feel underwhelming at times, but I don't know, it doesn't really matter to me, because I don't really play her for her stats, you know. I could be doing more damage if I was playing Raider, yeah, but does Raider have trance, and does Raider have this funny ass ult? No, I don't really think so. And so I don't really play Undertaker for the stats. I play her for her abilities and the fact that you have so much choice and the fact that she's fun. And it's not like you're ever throwing by playing Undertaker, so it's not really that much of a con in my opinion when you can pull this much shit off. I really do think Undertaker is a great addition to the game and really fills that gap with the hammer class, which I don't know was the most important, thing to fill, considering we already have characters that can use hammers pretty well, but it doesn't really matter. But basically, she again gives that player choice that I think is very important in this game, and other fan favorites like Iron Eye and Wilder have that similar player choice, and that's what makes them so fun, because you can use their abilities or whatever for different situations, which is awesome. And so yeah, I'm gonna hammer that more in the video. You're gonna get tired of me saying player choice, but I'm sorry. And while she doesn't excel in every area, she's still fun to play. But this next hero that I'm going to go over, Nightfarer, whatever you want to call him, has an entirely new way to play that no one has ever had in this game, which is very nice. And that is the Scholar, the second Nightfarer added to the DLC, who specializes in straight swords, which I think matches his character aesthetic quite well. The Scholar has extremely mid stats, I'm not gonna lie. He has C in literally everything, but his only area of expertise is Arcane, which is nice because you can proc a lot of status effects with his base weapon, like Executor, and so that's always a nice thing. But his appeal doesn't really come from his main weapon or his stats, it more so comes from his passive, the Bagcraft. This passive allows for the Scholar to store more items, up to 4 of a particular item, and allows him to upgrade them up to 4 times as he uses them consistently throughout the run. Essentially, the game plan for Scholar is to be constantly using items. You want to always be breaking boxes, opening chests, buying pots, or whatever, buying more pouch slots so you can carry more items. You just want to be using items constantly to try to upgrade them, because when you do, you get more damage on the item, or when you get them to level 4, you can have passive effects that are really good depending on the item that you're using. And because I'm constantly using items and consumables, I do like to run the Augur Relic finally, so I can coordinate with my team and transfer effects. And one thing that I'm really going to go over with Scholar is the fact that I feel like he fills that support role that is not really in the game very well. And again, while this whole playstyle isn't essentially necessary, you do have the choice to come and be more of a DPS. I do like the fact that it gives some of these relics more potential, like the Augur Relic, and I like that. And I think that's what's so good about Scholar, is the fact that he gives so much stuff that has not been, really relevant in Nightreign, a consistent and valuable purpose. There's never been a support role, and nobody ever uses these items for anything. Pots, for example, you might have them at the beginning of the run, and they might help you clear an enemy camp a bit faster, but other than that niche situation, they're not going to have any consistent value throughout the run. But Scholar fills that niche with his ability to use these items in a way that's meaningful. Now, if you level up a fire pot, you get more damage, and you get the fire spread like seen in Wilder's ultimate art. Now the pot talisman actually has some purpose outside of, niche situations. But it's not all sunshines and rainbows for like Scholar, because while he does make use of these niche items, which is great, they're not all treated equally. And I'm not going to explain the leveling system that affects each item at like max level, so if you're wanting a more in-depth explanation, I'd go check out Clanky Mocha's guide, as he provides more of an in-depth analysis on these items. But essentially, some classes like the pots and consumables are given much better scaling, leaving some others like greases and perfumer arts in the dust. And some of these items are not as common, like perfumer arts or whatever, so I can honestly see why they're not scaled as high, but it is kind of, a letdown, because what's so good about Scholar, again, is the fact that he gives everything a nice value, but not everything that he gives the value to is treated equally. So, like something like throwing knives is much harder to pull off consistently than if you got pots or whatever, Scholar does have two other abilities that I have yet to mention, his Analyze and Communion Ultimate Art. And so essentially, Analyze is Scholar's primary ability that allows you to study enemies over time for an effect. The ability is distance based, so it's best that you get closer to enemies to maximize how fast you can update it, and it is based on how far you charge it, so you want to maximize again how much you are able to charge this ability. So once you've done this ability fully charged or whatever, you get the choice to either debuff the enemy, which will lessen their poison attack, or you can buff yourself and allies if you have the relic to give yourself stamina and attack power. And I really do like this ability because, again, it complements that support playstyle that Scholar is really going for, as it makes those attacks from enemies that hit a bit too hard, a little bit more bearable. And then once you have that on the enemy, you can buff yourself and allies. Again, if you have the relic to buff allies, then you guys can have that more aggressive playstyle whenever you play. You have that more stamina and attack power, which is really nice, because it enables teammates to do what they're doing and be aggressive like a support player. And then his Communion Ultimate Art is basically a status effect that links together all enemies and allies with, again, this chain status effects. And so when enemies are hit, a percentage of that damage is transferred to all other enemies, and it's basically Hera's Hitch ability from Hades 2 if you've ever played that. But yeah, this ultimate is really good in my opinion. It's effective for dealing with large groups of enemies, which is good. It's a niche that I know Executor can do with his ult, but there's still some potential for him to die in that situation, whereas this ultimate is just a net positive and makes clearing out enemies really fast, especially like if you're doing castle. Just loop all the enemies together and boom, you can just get them out real quick and just kill them all. But I think the more consistent value for this ult comes from the fact that it has healing potential. And again, when you hit an enemy, a percentage of that damage is then distributed between allies as HP. And so this is more useful for whenever you're fighting a Night Lord, because then you can get your HP back while still being aggressive. And another nice thing about this ultimate is that the damage that you hit an enemy with is then also used to revive knockdown teammates. And so your teammate can be aggressive while you also expedite the process by rezzing your teammate. And it's just all around a net positive when you use this ult, because again, you still enable your teammates to fight the boss while still putting out that healing output like a traditional support player. And I know I keep hammering the support player mentality, but you can also do some pretty good damage with this character. Again, throwing stuff at level 4 can do some absolutely lethal damage, I'm not gonna lie. You can do that and it works fantastically. He just does the whole support thing better than any other character in the game, if you ask me. But yeah, overall, I am not the biggest Scholar fan. I play him a good amount, but I don't find it the most enjoyable thing to be throwing around pots and stuff the whole time. But I'm sure that's for someone, and I'm really grateful that it gives some stuff like perfumer talismans, although that doesn't really work, and pot talismans some real actual value in the game, and not just some useless items that you just walk past now. But yeah, I think it does the support character thing really well, and it fills that niche. And you know, I'm just happy that you can finally use the pot talisman. I don't really know, but great character, provides a lot of value for the game. All right, that's enough for the Nightfarers. I've pretty much glazed them, you know, to hell and back. So we're gonna move on to something I'm not too fond of, and that's the map design. The Hollow Shifting Earth is the newest map added to Nightreign, and if you watch my previous video on Nightreign where I did more of a critique as well, you'll know that this is what I thought Shifting Earth should have been like. The Hollows map is expansive and offers a vastly different aesthetic and playstyle from Limveiled with its cool blue color palette and this mystical music and aesthetic that it's going for. And on top of that, it offers a new way to experience pathing and routing, like I said, due to it being a new map and having this crystal breaking gimmick. And finally, the map has given players a new challenge, especially with the addition of the Shadow of the Erdtree enemies all throughout the map, increasing the baseline difficulty from that of Limveild's. And on paper, this all sounds really good, but I personally think in execution, they kind of faltered on some areas. But I'll start with the things that I think they did pretty well in the new map. First up, I'm actually really glad that they don't have any Everjails on this map. I don't think it would have worked anyways, but still, like regardless of that fact, I'm just happy that they don't have them because it's refreshing and it solidifies this map as its like own independent thing. And I think it's very nice. And in its place, the map really does fill that time up with mechanics and concepts like boss rush towers and the crystal breaking gimmick. And I think they do really well trying to complement or compensate the player's time with new things, and I like that. The POIs for this map are also really great, as you see expansion of ruins and other similar POIs due to the underground sections that offer more loot and enemies. In this way, you can kind of get more out of your time because you don't have to traverse to so many mini POIs. You can stay at one spot and do a lot there. And it's kind of like an intermediate between like a ruins from Limveiled and a massive POI as well. Like for example, if you do the catacombs location, which is for some reason not marked on the map, you get 2 bosses and a mini boss that drops a buff and a free duplication little station, I guess that's what I'm gonna call it. And that's just a whole lot of value off of one POI, and that can really help get your build going and your entire run just off to a very smooth start. And that's not just there, obviously that's probably the best small POI there, but again, on like the left side of the map, there's a ruins and then another underground section underneath with 2 bosses and then a major boss or minor boss to the left of the POI, and it's just really good. A lot of the locations on this map give a ton of value, and it's just very nice that you don't have to traverse everywhere to try to get the same amount of results that you'll get at one area in this map. But that is really all I have to say that is positive about this map. Like I said, the POIs are great. Also, the music is pretty cool. It's a lot more in your face and beautiful than Limveild's, in my opinion. But yeah, I think I'm gonna jump to my complaints now. To start off my complaints, I will focus on the crystal gimmick, and I really do applaud Nightreign for trying a new like design choice for the way that you play the core loop of the game, but I really do think that it failed in execution. And so basically on each seed, there's gonna be a set amount of locations that crystals will spawn on, and of course this is depending on the seed because they didn't change how the seeds work in this game, you know, duh. And all throughout your journey, you're going to need to break 4 of them in order to gain the power of the Shifting Earth. This is a mandatory process that you need to complete if you want to explore major POIs on day 2. It's set up like that. It's a very linear experience. In practice, this gimmick is very frustrating though because it limits that player choice into that more narrow experience, which wouldn't be too bad if it weren't for the fact that you have no idea what these crystals are until day 2. One of the major strengths about Limveiled is the fact that you have player choice. If you wanted to tackle the castle after one minor POI or one jail, you can go do that. Or if you want to go explore like major bosses or minor bosses, you can do that. If you want to go explore minor POIs, you can also do that. You know, it's all about what you want to do in your run. If you want to get more churches, all about what you want to prioritize. And that is very nice because you can kind of in a sense make your own roguelike, because probably the way you loop is going to be slightly different like from run to run, but you know, you get what I'm saying. You know, that player choice is still here on the new map, but it's only restricted to minor POIs. If you attempt to go to any major POI without the Shifting Earth buff, then you'll be at half HP the entire time. And yes, while you could theoretically go and complete the POIs like that, most players don't have the skill to do that. I know I don't, and I don't really think players should. So basically that player is gatekept behind this gimmick that is essentially invisible to players unless you memorize every single seed, which you shouldn't have to. And yeah, you just have to wait till day 2. And even if you think you're prepared to take on the major POIs, you just gotta pray that you find all the crystals during your routing to maybe get the chance to get there on day 1 or save time on day 2, which is definitely an issue I'll get back to in a second. And that second is now. So you may be saying that it's not a big deal because the crystals are revealed on day 2, but I would argue that it is because timing is very essential on this map, and a game where timing is already essential. But it's more so here than even on Limvale because of some map design choices that I'm going to go over in a second, and the fact that major POIs are already gatekept to day 2, so you need to maximize your time to get the most rewards. And so I think a proper fix for this would be to always have the crystals revealed, so that way players have the choice to tackle major POIs if they really wanted to, and players who want to focus on that more on day 2, they can do that. It's just kind of frustrating to have to play in a way that limits that player choice and optimization thing from Limveiled, and I understand it's a different thing, but it kind of just feels like a downgrade. And this way, if you did have the crystals unlocked, players are still interacting with the gimmick and still getting the Shifting Earth ability, but again, it still gives you that player choice to do whatever you want, which I think is a major strength for playing Nightreign. My second and greatest issue with the map design for the Hollows is the fact that it doesn't break away from the Shifting Earth design. And what I mean by that is that, like other Shifting Earths on Limvale, the final circle on day 2 always closes on the same spot. And looking back, this isn't as much of an issue on Limvale, besides the fact that it provides a repetitive experience, because there's actual stuff to do with the location that the final circle closes at. And because the final circle closes near or close to the Shifting Earth, even as you rotate to the location, there's going to be content and enemies to interact with, which you could consider a fair trade-off for not having some of the map left to do on day 2 because you're focusing on that specific location. Like if you're on Noxella, you're probably already going to be in Noxella when that final circle comes in, or if you're in the Rotted Woods, then you're going to be in the Rotted Woods where there are major bosses and an upgrade too. But on the Hollows map, this design choice hurts the experience in my opinion because there's literally nothing to do at the tower that the circle closes at. And because there's no constant and direct proximity of the tower, this means that you're most likely going to have to maximize your time spent at major POIs on day 2, which is already limited. And this also, because the tower is on the left side of the map, creates a bias within the map. And I'll explain that here. On the Limvale map, the castle is most likely going to be in the first circle leading to the final circle on day 2. It doesn't really matter what direction the circle is going because the castle is in an unbiased position on the map, the center of the map. And that means that if the circle is left, right, top, bottom, it doesn't matter. You're going to have time to complete the castle on average the same amount of time no matter where the circle closes. And on top of that, you have all of day 1 to do it as well. Honestly, you can start at day 1 and come back day 2, which is not a luxury that you have on the Shifting Earth map, which is not inherently a problem, but again, the map is biased, which I'm trying to explain here. And even in the rare case that the castle is cut off by the circle, you still have jails and major bosses to interact with, which I don't think is as common on this map, considering the fact that in that area that the circle kind of closes towards, you're already kind of forced to go explore because you have to look for crystals and stuff like that, not interact with the major POIs, and therefore most of the bosses and enemies and churches and stuff are already going to be eluded. You're kind of just backtracking area that you've already gone to. And so on the Hollow Shifting Earth, the major POIs are on the edge of the map, not the center, which isn't too much of a big deal, but the circle always closes top left, and therefore one of them is going to be favored more than the other when it comes down to time, again, on a map where time is very important. And so the bias created by the tower always closing in that zone will give you more time to complete the POI on the left side of the map, or the POIs on the left side of the map, because it's a natural progression to the final circle, kind of like you're going to have time to complete the Shifting Earth because it's a natural progression to the final circle as well. But if you get the right side of the map, then you miss so much more value because you have to spend a lot of time already on day 2 looking for crystals if you haven't gotten them, then rotating to that POI, and then spending a little bit of time there before you have to backtrack all the way to the left side of the map. And on top of that, because the major POI is so far from the tower, the right side I mean, you have to leave earlier due to the circle shrinking faster on that side. And because of this, every second matters on day 2, and it's up to a 50-50 to decide how much value you can get out of your time. And it honestly, again, feels like a downgrade from Limvale because it's not really up to you to decide how you want to tackle the situation. It's kind of just like you either get lucky or you don't. And I know that's like an RNG thing for roguelikes, but it just doesn't really work here for Nightreign in my opinion. And this is why I say player choice is so important, because the RNG aspect of this game is locked behind weapons. And so if you don't even get the choice to interact with that RNG in the same way that you would on another side of the map, it just doesn't feel as fair, if you ask me. But I could be just like tripping or whatever. You guys let me know in the comments. But again, this is why I think that crystals should always be available, as locking crystals away takes away from the time that you could have spent at a major POI. And the combination of limited freedom with this really bad map design choice, in my opinion, can make playing this map somewhat of a miserable experience because of how unfair it can be to get the wrong side of the circle. And again, on Limveld, you can pretty much get equal value no matter what side of the map the circle closes on, but here it's entirely dependent on what side of the map the first circle of day 2 lands on, and that just kind of sucks when you are going through your run and then, you know, the circle just closes on the right side, because now you know you're just not going to have enough time, and then God forbid the Tricephalos raid happens. We'll get back to that later, but oh my goodness, it's bad, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, that's really my major complaint about the map design. I know probably an easy solution would be just to put another tower somewhere on the map. I'm not a map designer, I just think that would make it easier, so that way it's kind of fair. It doesn't matter what side of the map you get, because there's going to be a tower on that side anyways. But you know, it's probably not going to happen because the DLC is already out, but it's just like something I think they could do a little bit better. Some more minor complaints I have to do with some concepts that I think also were not executed as well. Like, for example, on the right side of the map, again, there is this underground section underneath the large landmass that houses the big POIs, and this is executed all throughout the map. I actually really like the idea of there being more content underneath wherever you're at. You know, I think that's pretty cool. The only thing is that there is actually nothing to do there, really. By the time that you spawn, because no spawn point is near that location, you have to go out of your way to go there, and there really isn't anything down there. It's kind of a confusing mess to navigate, and there's nothing but mini bosses and kind of just starting loot. If you ask me, I think it would be a really cool starting location if they just dropped us there, but there's no spawn point even near that. So the only reason I go down there is if there is like a quick mini boss I can just knock out real quick, or if there's a church or a crystal that I actually need. But other than that, I think it's like kind of an empty area that could use some more love, but that's really about it. Otherwise, I think the whole underground area is just kind of executed very well, and other areas of the map, like I said, the other minor POIs and the catacomb area, I think that's pretty cool, but there it just feels a little bit underused. And then my last complaint about the map is the boss rush towers, which I think are really cool and a great addition to the game, just adding more options for the way you play. Unfortunately though, this is again plagued by the fact that you have to get all the crystals, and that means that you're probably going to have to experience this on day 2, and so therefore you're going to have less time to do it. The only complaint I have about them is that there really isn't enough incentive to push for that top floor. I usually only do 2 floors, and if I'm lucky I'll get one on the right side, but the reward being only a measly 2k merc is just not enough for me to actually want to go all the way to the top. Most of the time I'll get, you know, like 2 floors, and that's more of a strategic plan than anything. I'll just leave, and I really don't feel like I'm missing out on anything, because there's like nothing up there that's gonna change my run or like provide me value after the fact, you know? The only thing that Merc does in this game is allow you to get relics by gambling it all away and then getting skins, but once you have all the skins, you know, all you're left to do is gamble. So I would honestly say that they need to put more of a reward up there besides just 2k Merc that you can just spend and like get 4 relics. I don't know. Either they put a lot more Merc up there to, again, give you more money to get skins and gamble, or actually put something of value up there that will influence the run, which I think that would be a more rewarding experience for someone who has to set aside time to do all 3 floors, and definitely rewards players with skill that are able to overcome the challenge that is the boss rush. Again, I think that's really cool that you have to set aside time and fight some really tough enemies to get a reward at the top, but it's just kind of not well executed in my opinion. I would say that they probably need to put like a legendary weapon or like a choice of legendary weapons or free legendary, I don't really know, kind of like the Shifting Earth for the Magworm. But when you have that challenge, I think that would be a pretty rewarding experience. But I know I'm saying the same stuff over and over, but I really do like the boss towers and concept, and I think they should just, you know, patch it up a little bit so that way it's a bit more rewarding. But yeah, that's enough ranting. All in all, I think that the new map is decent, you know, but it just holds itself back in a lot of areas that Limveld does not. And I just want to make it clear that I don't hate this map, but other than, you know, the Noxella Shifting Earth, I just don't see the reason to pick this map over Limveld, you know, like a lot of the other shifting earths in this game, because it's just not as good and doesn't provide you with such a consistent experience, especially because of that 50-50 map choice design. And yeah, I just don't know why I would pick this over Limveld. I still play it occasionally, but like when I'm bored of Limveld, but it's just not a very good choice in my opinion. But again, that's just me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. But now I'm gonna get over to a map that, you know, doesn't tell such a sad story in my opinion, and that is Limveld. I think Limveld definitely tells a much better story because there's really nothing but net positives except for one POI in my opinion, and it doesn't do anything crazy. I'm gonna keep this section short because nothing that they added fundamentally changes how you play. It just spices some things up by adding minor POIs, 3 from Shot of the Earth Tree, and of course, you know, they had to have that Miyazaki approved swamp, which I don't really care about. I think it's a pretty cool POI regardless, but yeah, these serve as a way to spice up the rotations a bit from the same kind of ruins and minor POIs that we already know, and I think that's quite nice. The only one that I really don't like is the village one, where you have 3 of the same enemy, because it just feels like that one ancient heroes and more ruins, but just longer because the enemies are tankier, and you know, it can be kind of hard to find them at first, and I just don't think that it's like really worth your time. Even at like a higher level, it's just not really worth your time. But that's more of a minor complaint. I think Limveld did great here because, you know, it's just more POIs for us to explore with some cool bosses or whatever from the DLC. So there's nothing much that I can say here. You know, they have that free weapon skill change thing at 2 of the POIs, which I think is pretty cool as well. But it's not anything that's going to consistently change your run for the better. It's really just if you have like a skill on your starting armament that you really don't like. But yeah, that's really about it for Limveld. Like it, but it's not anything crazy. Moving on to something that I do think is crazy, which are the bosses. Before we get into the actual Night Lords, I wanted to briefly talk about the Night Bosses that were added to the DLC. I genuinely think that all of the bosses that were added were great additions, with fan favorites like Artorias and the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, and the one and only Moglaster being reworked for the context of Nightreign. These bosses definitely match the overall scaling and difficulty and can pose a genuine threat to a run, whereas when I'm not playing the DLC, you know, on Limveld, it's very rare that I lose a Night 2 run. And yeah, I don't know. The same thing also goes for the Night 1 bosses as well, like the Demon Princes, the Rune Bear, and the King Von duo. They can be genuinely challenging fights. I've lost on both Night 1 and Night 2 to these bosses, even when I have the experience. You know, of course things get easier with experience, but I still think they provide more of a challenge in the Limveld, you know, Tree Sentinel spam. It's just nice to have that feeling of some new challenge and a genuine threat. And a complaint I had in my base review is that the Night bosses on Nights 1 and 2 didn't really feel like a unique challenge or anything that they really put effort into, which I guess you could say that they don't put effort into anything, they really just copy and paste stuff here, but you get what I mean. And I think that's definitely solved here. You know, besides the Rune Bear, you know, I think that fight is kind of annoying, but other than that, you know, it was pretty great. But that's enough talk about the Night bosses. Let's get on to what we're really here for, the Night Lords. And so the Balancers are the first boss that the player will unlock in the DLC, and they consist of 2 phases, where in the first phase you'll be fighting 7 enemies with very similar movesets before you get to the overall HP down to a certain level, in which you will begin phase 2, and you'll pretty much do the same thing, but this time one of the Valkyries is enhanced and the main contributor to the HP bar. Sounds very familiar, but although I'm personally not the biggest fan of this boss, I would be lying if I said this boss was bad. The fight is extremely beautiful with its angelic visuals and a soundtrack that fits perfectly with the overall aesthetic of the fight, and the attacks are also pretty intuitive and fun to dodge. My main annoyance is the fact that this boss feels like a mini Everdark Libra. A little bit above, but still Everdark Libra. And if you've ever fought him, you know, he's very controversial in the fan base. You know, some people love him. I personally do not love him because he's very annoying, and that's still seen here. Essentially in phase 2, like I said, there's that powered up version of the enemy who is the main contributor to the health bar, and that means that there are 6 other little angels to annoy the shit out of you while you try to fight the main boss. And this is remedied by the fact that you can still do damage to the overall boss HP by fighting the little ones, which is a step above Everdark Libra, but just knowing that they're not the main focus kind of just makes them feel like more of an annoyance. And honestly, they can jump scare the shit out of you when you're trying to fight another one. Like, they'll come behind with this grab attack, and it scares me so much, honestly. And it's just kind of annoying sometimes when you're fighting and then you just get snatched up and impaled with a spear. But that I'm ranting. I don't know, kind of like in the Everdark Libra fight, the targeting system can kind of be annoying, as enemies will randomly switch up aggro, and the main boss will just teleport on you while you're fighting, and it's just kind of annoying sometimes. And then they'll all leave you to go aggro your one helpless Iron Eye as he goes to run away, and it's just, you know, it's not the most fun boss in my opinion, considering that the aggro system is just kind of weird, but I don't know, I could be just yammering right now. And then also, sleep is just not effective for this boss at all, and while you could go around and put every enemy to sleep, you know, that's just not intuitive, because the game plan is to kill all the minor enemies and then kill the major enemy, so that way you only have to do 2 cycles, as when you killed the main boss you kind of have to repeat the whole phase 2 transition, and it's just time consuming. And so yeah, it's not like a really big complaint, like I said, more of a nitpick, because weaknesses aren't really necessary to beat bosses in this game. It's just something that's nice, but even here it's just kind of useless. But regardless of my complaints, I still think this boss is a step above many of the bosses in the base game, and I'd rather fight this boss any day of the week over Sentient Pest or Augur. I was not a very big fan of the Everdark design. Fortunately for me though, this boss has an Everdark which I think is genuinely amazing in comparison. For starters, the boss is completely rid of the Everdark Libra design because of the lack of a central boss, which already gets rid of my main complaint about the boss fight, so it's only up from here. But on top of that, the Everdark builds on the foundation of the boss concept and completely reworks the visual design. Now, instead of these angelic warriors, they've been violently transformed into these terrifying shells of their former selves. Their design still retains the beauty of the originals, but leaves a deep, unsettling feeling of discomfort as they frantically move around the arena like puppets being sporadically controlled. And honestly, this kind of reminds me of the enemies in Silent Hill F with their exaggerated movements, and it's just really creepy, especially with all the blood and gore everywhere on this boss fight. Their movements are fast and exaggerated, introducing new and altered attacks from the original, as well as creating this sense of unnervedness that really amps up the flow of battle. And you know, this could be my bias seeping through, because I am, as you'll see on this channel, I'm a big fan of fast-paced boss fights because they really allow you to, I don't know, feel in the moment, and it feels like a song and dance sometimes. I'm ranting again, but yeah, the original boss was much more calm in comparison, which isn't a bad thing, but I just like more fast-paced bosses more. On top of this, the boss also has a dodging phase where it turns into this, you know, massive worm like amalgamation of flesh and just sends out a bunch of AoE attacks, including my favorite one that is a giant beautiful flower that gives blood loss to anyone in vicinity. You know, very poetic, I can already tell. But overall, this boss in the context of Nightreign is an easy S tier for me, as in my opinion it hits the nail on the head for what I look for, which is an entertaining boss that really makes you feel like you're in the moment, whether that could be through soundtrack, visual design, or attacks. But usually it's a culmination of all three, which I think this boss handles wonderfully. And easily like a top 5 boss, maybe even a top 3 for me. And even though I just glazed the Everdark Valkyries so hard, I really do think that the Dreglord, the final boss of the game, is just on a different level. This boss is the second and final boss that consists of 3 phases and a final 4th desperation phase. And I've got to say, this boss is truly the pinnacle of what bosses can be in Nightreign, and I don't think that's an understatement. I think a lot of the community agrees as well. But here I'm going to pose my own reasons for why I think the Dreglord is such a good boss, and I really do think he pulls off the raid boss thing better than any other in the game, and I think that's due to a combination of elements such as the variety of AoE attacks, a large HP pool, and a genuine spike in difficulty throughout the fight that's kind of way harder than other bosses in this game. For starters, the Dreglord has some of the highest HP, if not the highest HP in the entire game, ensuring that this encounter is no quick endeavor. You will spend a lot of time fighting this boss. He has 68,000 HP across all phases, and for reference, Haloser has 48,000 across all phases, and right after that is Everdark Tricephalos at 52k. That is a 16,000 HP gap, which is kind of insane. And because of this large leap in HP, the boss can feel almost insurmountable at times, as even with the best weapons, it can feel like he's just never going to die. Some people argue that the boss HP is too high, and I kind of do agree with that, especially on phase 1, because there's not really that much of a dramatic change in the moveset to justify how long it takes to kill, and sometimes it can feel like a drag fest. But regardless of that criticism, the HP bar really establishes that boss-to-player dynamic that Souls games are known for, that being this really unfair and daunting challenge that the player must somehow overcome with wit and skill, and I think that is really seen here in the Dreglord because of how much HP he has. The second thing that I think makes this boss so good is the sheer amount of AoE attacks that the boss has. In the first phase alone, he introduces 4 AoE attacks, with that being a ball throw, a ball slam, a gigantic hammer attack, and an explosion of Scarlet Rot that covers the map, and a rain of Scarlet Rot, as well as some mini geysers that can also do damage to you. In later phases, the boss also expands on these attacks by incorporating them into attack chains and expanding their area of effect with the massive LeBron ball slam at the beginning of phase 3. In combination with a variety of attack chains that the boss already has, these AoE attacks make sure that you're already on your toes, ready to move and dodge or just run the fuck away whenever you need to, because these attacks can do some serious damage. It's a hallmark of raid bosses to be able to do these AoE attacks because it further reinforces the idea that the boss is not just a threat to you or whoever they're aggroed on, they're a threat to everybody, and you need to be prepared for anything that comes your way. The sheer amount of these attacks that he has in his arsenal does a great job of staying true to that philosophy while also being extremely entertaining and immersive to watch unfold. Like, again, the LeBron slam that he does at the beginning of phase 3 is like so, I wouldn't say cinematic, but it's very entertaining in the fact that you have no idea what's going on the first time, and these big pillars come out of the ground and he does this huge map-wide attack. It's just really cool to watch unfold. But the last thing that I think that he does very well that kind of ties everything together is his overall difficulty, as a boss really wouldn't be that rememberable if they were super easy. And so this boss is definitely a step up in overall difficulty. Like in the Hello Stir fight, the first phase is deceptively straightforward, with predictable yet punishing attacks that allow for the player to adjust to the boss's moveset. Granted, there are a lot more attacks on phase 1 of the Dreg than the Night aspect, even summoning enemies and the worm faces, which honestly I think the boss will be fine without the worm faces. They're really annoying, but the general idea still stands. It's a really straightforward phase. But the boss becomes a true menace in phase 2, where you see a complete revamping of his attack patterns and chains, where as phase 1 felt like we were kind of fighting a retired athlete out of his prime. You know, you can tell that he's still got it, but phase 2 felt like I was being trapped in a cage with prime Mike Tyson, and he had a thirst for blood. His more aggressive and rabid look is accompanied by attacks that are fast and flashy, even to the point where he starts jumping around the arena like a monkey. Anytime the boss aggroes you from this phase onward, you kind of just have to pray that you make it out alive, because you're going to be faced with an onslaught of attacks that seem to never end, and just when you think it does, he slams your face into the ground with another AoE attack. I mean, it's a complete change of pace that's seen with the Everdark Balancers, and I think that's geared to that more rapid playstyle that's more engaging for a person like me, and that I'm sure many other players are fond of, because it keeps you in the moment and engaged with the boss fight at all times. Overall, I just think that this fight is truly amazing and delivers on the potential of what Nightreign bosses have. It's upwards of 15 minutes of pure survival, and that's more on the longer end of my runs, but you really want to come prepared with everything you can get your hands on. The best weapons, extra pouch slots, talismans, you name it. It's not even a want, really, it's a need, because the Dreglord fight demands that you come in with all that you have, or you're probably going to get your shit rocked. And all of that is just to stand toe to toe with the boss, as there's been plenty of times where I'm level 15 and barely squeak out alive or just straight up die. And I love the fact that I really have to lock in for this boss, as I try my hardest to actively conserve my flasks for the phase 1, because I know that this is just the beginning. I'm in for a rough time after phase 1. And so I just love that, and I find myself bobbing and weaving, trying to res my teammate that has somehow died 7 times as the background music plays in the background. Like, I'm not even joking. I had this one time where my friend died 7 whole times, and I promise you it brought out the most locked in gameplay I've ever experienced in my entire life, and I'm not even joking. It was such an interesting experience, because I don't know how you die 7 times. I mean, he was playing Revenant, which was not the ideal choice, but still, the point stands, it does a very good job of keeping you in the moment and engaged with the boss fight. And I honestly don't know how Shoei Miyazawa keeps doing it, the absolute GOAT, but he kills it with the soundtrack. I mean, he's done it for the Elden Ring soundtrack, he's done it for the Nightreign DLC soundtrack, he's done it for the Nightreign base game, and the Shadow of the Erdtree soundtrack, and he kills it with this individual track for the Dreglord as well. It just adds so much immersion and hype, and I really can't express how well he knocked it out of the park here, but all the props to him for making this boss fight even more fun than it already is. And so yeah, that's really what I think about the bosses in the DLC. I think they consistently offer a good time. Granted, there are only 2, but they're really high quality in my opinion, and it's a major step up from the kind of hit or miss that we had in the base game. And maybe we would have seen that hit or miss aspect if they added another boss, but I don't know. It's only $15, and there's a lot more content to interact with other than just the bosses, so I can't be too greedy here. But yeah, I really did like the bosses in this DLC, and I think that if you haven't got the DLC, I would get them for the bosses in the Nightfarers so far as well. And to finish this video off, I'm also going to talk about something I'm not as happy about in this update, and those are the boss raids, which I think are kind of, again, like hit or miss. And one in particular, I have a feeling you know what I'm talking about, is not very fun in my opinion, but we'll get to that. Anyways, there are 3 boss raids added in this DLC, the Blizzard, Judgment, and Gladius raids, all of which can happen as you play throughout the DLC. The Blizzard and Judgment events happening on Limveld, and then strangely the Gladius raid happening on both maps. It's really weird, I don't know, but it just happens. And so I'm just going to go through each of them individually and then just talk about them and what I like and don't like. And so the Blizzard on day 2, happens as you're going through Limveld, and a chill mist rolls in and hail begins to rain. And from that point on, the map will be engulfed in this blue fog, and hail will occasionally rain down. And it does a decent amount of damage, so you're probably going to want to get this raid over with so you don't accidentally die, which has definitely happened to me. And essentially all you need to do to complete this raid is just send one person to the marked location on the map, and there you'll hit Callio like once or twice and she'll just go away, ending the raid. And therefore this raid is just super straightforward and simple. It doesn't really disrupt the pathing at all, as you really only have to send one person to do it. And because of its simplicity though, it does yield the weakest rewards, only 52k, which is less than half the amount of the other 2 raids, and the cold mirage effect, which is also pretty mid in my opinion, because it's not as consistent as a winning grace, and it's not common to take a lethal hit in this game, so once it's used, you don't get it back. And basically cold mirage just, again, protect you from one lethal hit like 6th Sense, and makes you invisible for some time, but you get it on day 2 where there's still a lot of potential to get knocked down, and so once that's used, then you don't get it back. And so it's kind of weird to try to play around and make sure you don't die, so I wouldn't depend on it to make your run like a winning grace, like salvageable, I guess. I don't really know, but yeah, it's nice to have considering how easy the raid is. But yeah, it's probably my favorite raid within the DLC, just because it's really quick and easy, and it feels like a nice reward, I guess, for just getting it out the way real quick. But that's about it for the Blizzard. It's a pretty cool raid. The Judgment raid is the second raid that I experienced in this game, and it is only specific to Limveld from my experience, and it appears when the message pops up that says the Balancers will judge. And this raid will subtract 3 from your current amount of flasks before splitting you and your teammates up into separate POIs. At each location, you and your teammates will have to go down and attack the Balancers of each area that are found alongside the normal bosses of that POI. Because the Balancer raid, the bosses have been affected with this status effect that kind of resets their HP bar if you kill the Balancers first. So if you want to maximize rewards, you should kill the regular boss first and then the Balancers, but I can understand based on a criticism that I'm about to give that that is not always the most optimal strategy. And the one thing that I really don't like about this raid is the fact that it is quite ruthless. I'm not gonna lie, like, it does not compensate for the fact that Nightfarers can kind of vary in strength for handling this situation, whereas characters like Wilder, Iron Eye, and Raider are going to be much better at tackling this raid than someone like Recluse or Revenant, who take a while to get their builds up. And it's just kind of not fair, because especially if you haven't gotten to church yet, then you have 0 flask, and it can really ruin your run if you're just not prepared. Like, if you roll in there with an ultimate art, then you're going to be fine because you can take down a lot of enemies at one time. But if you have 0 flask, barely have a good weapon, and you're low level, because it happens very soon into day 1, then it might just ruin your run because you have to spend the entire day doing the event. Thankfully though, your teammates can roll up and kind of help you when they finish theirs, and you'll get a flask back for each Balancer killed. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it can just be kind of unfair. And I think this raid should happen on day 2, just so you can handle it more effectively, and that way Nightfarers that take a while to get their builds going can, handle this. Maybe the people are like a fan of the difficulty for this, I think that's fine, but like, honestly, it's just kind of annoying and frustrating, especially when again, it's probably not in the back of your mind that it's going to happen. You haven't gotten to church yet because you have your route, and you're going to go get that church, and then you just kind of get TP'd away, and then now you're kind of cooked. But I don't know, maybe that's a skill issue, I don't really know. But I don't think this raid is like bad at all. It definitely compensates players for the time you spend because again, in this game, time is a crucial element. So if you're gonna get whisked away for a raid, then you at least need to be compensated. And I think it does that very well with giving you 120k runes. And that's not to mention the buff and the runes that you can get from the boss at each POI, which is pretty nice. The buff for this raid, which I have not mentioned, is pretty bad in my opinion. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not anything again that is going to actually change your run. Basically, the buff for this is like a gambling winding grace. Basically, that's how I'm going to explain it. Because it can revive you as you get knocked down at any time during the run or any time during the Night Lord fight randomly. But like I said, it's gambling. You do not want to consistently rely on this. It's nice to have, but it's not anything that I'm like, yes, I'm so glad I got this because it's definitely going to help me later on in the run. There have been plenty of times where I just don't get rezzed, but then there are other times where I get rezzed twice back to back and it's just like kind of weird. So again, not very consistent. It's nice to have, but it's not anything that I like care about.
You're just not. Are we doing okay damage?
Nah, I definitely. Oh, huh. It's my first time being blessed. Oh. What do you want me to do again? That wasn't even fair. Okay.
That's so funny.
And the last raid, the Tricephalos raid, is the third and final raid added to the DLC, and I am not a big fan of this raid, as I'm sure many other people are, but I haven't actually checked, so let me know in the comments down below. But interestingly, this raid occurs both on Limveld and the Hollows map, so it is definitely the most common one that you'll experience, and that's probably for the worst if you ask me. But essentially, the raid begins when the message "Fire Summoning a Beast" appeared. Just pops up on your screen, and following that you're gonna go through a similar premise of the Balancer raid in the sense that 3 mini bosses appear on the map, leading you and your teammates to split up to try to take down the raid as fast as possible. And while of course you could try to compensate for the fact that you're not as good as like others at the game by sticking together, you're gonna waste more time doing that. So in my experience, nobody has tried to stick together for this raid unless it's on the Limveld map, where it does have the potential to spawn closer together, so that way it's just more optimal to just kind of stick together. But especially on the Hollows map, you're going to want to split up and try to take down the dogs as fast as possible. But I'm kind of getting sidetracked. And again, this raid kind of sounds fine on paper, but it does fall flat, in my opinion, because for starters, you are not transported to the dogs like you are in the Balancer raid, which wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the fact that there are 3 bosses to kill. No matter how you slice it, splitting up or sticking together, you're still going to waste a good amount of time getting to each dog. And this, again, isn't as much of an issue on Limveld because on that map, you know, they can spawn kind of close together. But on the new map, they always spawn in the same place and it's pretty far spread out. And it happens on day 2 on the new map. You know, that day when you really do need to maximize your time, well, guess what? Now you have to spend your time going on this raid, which I really don't think is worth it, especially on the Hollows map. It's a different story for Limveld, again, because it's on day 1 for that map, which is really nice because it gives you 120k runes, which is awesome because it can get your levels up and it gives you a pretty good buff that gives you stamina for successive attacks and helps stamina regeneration for your allies, which is pretty cool. But again, on the Hollows map, this is just not a good compensation at all. It's not a good trade-off because on day 2, that's what, again, you're supposed to go to major POIs, and I don't think 120k runes that you could have got at those major POIs is enough, especially when you're trading off good weapons or whatever you have, good buffs. It's just not worth it in my opinion. But that is not even my main complaint with the boss. Yeah, sure, it takes a lot of time to get to each boss, but my main complaint comes in when you actually kill one of the dogs. And I'm sure many other people have experienced this too, but the mini dogs are actually abysmal to deal with. Oh my god, they're so annoying. And so essentially they also follow Everdark Libra design, but this time it's to a T, as hitting the mini dogs just does not like actually affect the Tricephalos at all. And so, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive to deal with the mini dogs first because you want to get the raid over with as fast as possible. So they're just really annoying as you try to fight Tricephalos. But they also do a lot of damage on top of the constant tick damage that you're taking from the event, which I actually don't mind. But having to deal with the mini dogs on top of that is a bit much, especially when they do this one AoE attack that does like a shit ton of damage for no reason. Like I'm talking like you could send in that fire for 1.5 seconds and you're just gonna die. Like it's really bad. But you know, it is what it is. I just don't think that this boss raid is worth it, I guess. Like the Balancer raid, you get compensated with a bunch of buffs and runes, but here it's just not as good, especially on the hollow map, like I said. And yeah, I don't know, man. I'm just not a fan of this raid. I think it's really annoying and counterintuitive. But I don't know, man. I just don't like this raid. It's like the only one that I will get. And I like, I'll have my route plan, and the smile just goes right off my face, bro. Like I literally just cannot with this raid. And again, that has to do with the mini dogs. I think if they remove that, this raid would be much better. But they're just really fucking annoying. And then one more issue with the boss raids, when talking about the balancers and Tricephalos, is the fact that they are not scaled for single player or multiplayer, or like just 2-player, because you're still gonna have to fight 3 dogs and you're still gonna have to fight 3 balancers, which can take up more time considering you have one less player, which means less resources to deal with the issue. And so that can feel kind of unfair, especially when you're playing single player, because it just takes up a whole lot more time that you could have been spending doing other things. But you know, that's just more of a minor complaint. But yeah, I'm done ranting about the boss raids. I know you guys are probably sick of it. I'm done. All right. But yeah, that is really about it. The Nightreign DLC, the Forsaken Hollows, I honestly think is great. I know I spent a lot of time kind of just getting, I'm really not mad. I was just kind of criticizing the game, but I also gave it the praises that it deserves. So honestly, I think that it is a pretty good DLC. And if you like Nightreign, if you put as much hours in the game as me, then you're going to be able to look past these flaws and just continue playing the game, because it's just more Nightreign at the end of the day, with some pretty cool Nightfarers and awesome bosses. And you know, they don't do anything again crazy to change up the core loop of the game with like the seeds and stuff. So I don't know, I like the fact that they went out and tried this new like loop mechanic with the crystals, but it honestly just kind of hinders the gameplay experience. But that's really about it for the video. Thank you guys for watching so much. I really do appreciate it, as this is my second time recording the audio for this, as the first time it was a whole lot more rough. And yeah, but basically I've been working on this for like 3 days. The script for this video, double space, is like 20 pages, man. It's actually kind of crazy. But thank you guys for watching. I really did put a lot of effort in this video, and it was really hard for me to put down Clair Obscur. Like, I actually have been playing that game so much. I'm like kind of no-lifing it, but I wanted to put this video out before I got back to school. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think. Any constructive criticism would be nice. And yeah, like and subscribe. I'm done ranting. I need to go edit this video now. Peace.